The wind howled like a beast across the snowy plains, a never-ending symphony of nature's raw power. Trees groaned under the weight of fresh snow, and every breath in the open air turned into icy mist. Inside a solitary wooden cabin nestled in the northern wilderness, Warren Mitchell sat by the flickering fire, staring into the orange flames that cracked the heavy silence of the room. It had been weeks since he had last spoken to another human being. Warren, once a city dweller, had chosen isolation after life delivered one heartbreak too many. Out here, in the heart of the forest, he didn't have to pretend anymore. The pain, the guilt, it all echoed softly between the trees and the silence. But on that particular evening, something changed. A strange sound broke the steady rhythm of the wind and the creaking logs in the fire. A soft, almost imperceptible scratching, then a whimper. Warren froze. He put down his mug of lukewarm coffee and slowly rose, his ears straining. The sound came again. It wasn't the wind. It was coming from the front door. Heart pounding, Warren stepped cautiously to the window. He brushed aside the frost on the glass and peered into the darkness. What he saw stopped him cold. Two figures, small, hunched, shivering, stood at his doorstep. Wolves. One was large, clearly an adult. The other was much smaller, perhaps a pup. Their fur was caked with snow and ice, and their legs trembled with exhaustion. But it wasn't the sight of wild wolves that sent a chill through Warren's body. It was their eyes. They weren't wild with hunger or fear. They were pleading for help. Warren's instinct screamed at him not to open the door. These were wolves, after all, apex predators of the forest. But something deep inside him stirred. Maybe it was the way the small one couldn't even stand properly. Maybe it was the way the older one stood between it and the wind, shielding it like a parent. Warren hesitated only a moment longer. Then he moved to the door, unbolted it, and slowly pulled it open. The wind rushed in immediately, carrying flakes of snow and a biting chill. The wolves didn't move. They just looked at him, their bodies still trembling. Warren stepped aside, keeping his movements calm and slow. "It's okay," he whispered, barely believing he was doing this. "Come on in." The larger wolf gave a small nudge to the smaller one, and cautiously, they stepped inside. Their paws left watery prints on the wooden floor as they moved toward the fire, collapsing near the warmth. Warren quickly shut the door behind them, securing it again as the blizzard outside screamed in protest. He stood there for a long moment, watching these wild creatures lying on his floor, trusting him. Their breaths were shallow, and their ribs poked through their fur. The smaller one whimpered, trying to curl into a ball, but wincing as it moved its leg. Warren noticed it immediately, a limp, an injury. He crouched down slowly, not wanting to alarm them. "Easy there," he murmured. "Let me help you." He grabbed a blanket and gently wrapped the smaller wolf, who flinched but didn't resist. The larger one kept a close watch, but made no move to stop him. Then Warren did something he hadn't done in months. He cooked for someone other than himself. He rummaged through his freezer and pulled out some meat, venison he had hunted last fall. He cooked it lightly, just enough to warm it through, then placed 2 portions near the wolves. They didn't hesitate. The meat vanished in seconds, devoured with the desperation of creatures who had been starving for days. Warren sat back on his heels, watching them eat, trying to understand how this was even happening. How had they found him? Why had they approached his home? More importantly, why did he feel connected? As the wolves curled near the fire, exhaustion overtaking their bodies, Warren whispered, "Guess we're roommates now." Morning brought a soft golden hue that filtered through frost-kissed windows. Warren awoke on the couch, stiff from the awkward sleep, but instantly alert. He turned toward the fireplace. The wolves were still there, The big one had remained by the smaller wolf's side all night, curled around it protectively. At some point, the younger had placed its injured leg across the older's body, as if for comfort. The sight tightened something inside Warren's chest. He got up quietly and walked to the kitchen, boiling water on the wood stove and preparing some oatmeal for himself. He set aside another batch of meat, warming it up and carefully placing it near the wolves again. As the smell wafted through the room, both wolves stirred. The smaller one, still limping, slowly raised its head. Its eyes met Warren's. There was no fear, only fatigue and a strange, gentle acceptance. "Good morning," Warren said softly. "Still alive, huh?" The bigger wolf stood, stretched stiffly, and nudged the younger forward. They approached the food again, and this time, the larger wolf paused before eating, as if acknowledging Warren's role in their survival. "You need names," Warren said aloud, more to himself than to them. "Can't keep calling you Big One and Small One." He studied them thoughtfully. "You," he pointed at the larger one, "you're a shadow in the snow." Calm, watchful, shadow. That fits. The wolf blinked at him, unfazed. "And you," he turned to the pup, "you're cold and fragile, but you've got spirit. Like frost that clings even in the sun, Frost." "Yeah." Frost gave a quiet yip, almost like a sigh, and then laid his head back down. Shadow settled beside him again. Ever watchful over the next few days, the cabin took on a new rhythm. Warren cleaned Frost's wounded leg, gently wrapping it with bandages. Shadow would always stay close, but never aggressive, just watchful. Eventually, Warren learned to move without fear, understanding that their mutual trust was a fragile yet growing thing. The snowstorm outside lasted nearly a week. It trapped them in a world of white silence, but inside the cabin, something extraordinary was blooming, a quiet coexistence. Warren often found himself talking out loud as he went about his day, not expecting answers, but comforted by the presence of living beings. He told them about his old life, about the veterinary clinic he once ran with his fiancée, Rachel, about the car crash that took her life and left him hollow, bitter, and lost, about how he came to this cabin thinking he'd never open his heart again. Shadow would tilt his head slightly, listening in his own way. Frost would nuzzle closer when Warren's voice trembled. And for the first time in years, Warren cried without shame. It was on the 8th morning, when the skies finally cleared and sunlight sparkled on the snow like crushed diamonds, that Warren decided to chop wood. Supplies were low, and with the wolves improving, he felt a strange motivation, a desire to provide. He stepped outside with his axe, the air biting but bearable. As he walked past the edge of the cabin, something caught his eye. Tracks. Fresh ones. Wolf tracks, but different, heavier, erratic. They staggered across the snow in uneven patterns. Warren knelt, inspecting them closely. The gait was off. "Injured," he muttered, tracing the line with his eyes. The tracks led toward the woods, disappearing behind a ridge. Could it be another wolf? He rushed back inside and checked on Shadow and Frost. They were both awake, ears perked. Shadow paced by the window, nose pressed against the glass, as if he, too, sensed something beyond. Warren's heart thudded. There's another out there, isn't there? He wasn't sure why he cared so much. Maybe it was the way Frost looked up at him when he spoke, or the unspoken bond he now felt with Shadow. But the idea of another one of them, injured, alone in the cold, was unbearable. Warren grabbed his coat, gloves, snow boots, an emergency pack. He strapped on his snowshoes and loaded his backpack with a blanket, some meat, a first aid kit, and a flashlight. "I'll be back," he told them, kneeling in front of the wolves. "Promise." Shadow gave a low whine, then laid beside Frost, as if accepting Warren's mission. Warren followed the tracks deep into the woods, moving slowly but purposefully. Every gust of wind tried to erase the trail, but he pressed on. The tracks curved, then dipped down a snowy incline. And there, near a small hollow beneath a frozen tree root, he saw it. A wolf, barely conscious, its breathing shallow and body twitching. Its fur was mottled gray with streaks of black, but it looked like Shadow, same facial markings, same build. This had to be their brother. Storm, Warren whispered. He didn't know how he knew the name. He just felt it. He moved quickly but gently, wrapping Storm in the blanket and checking for injuries. There was a gash on the hind leg and signs of frostbite on his tail. Time was running out. Warren hoisted the weak animal onto his sled and turned back, his own strength waning under the weight and cold. Hours later, as the cabin came into view, he saw Shadow standing outside, waiting. When Warren reached the porch, Shadow stepped forward, sniffed Storm, and then gave a low, almost mournful howl. Inside, Frost let out a yelp of recognition. It was the first time Warren saw Shadow let down his guard. He nuzzled his brother, circling him, licking his face. Frost struggled up and limped over to join the reunion. 3 wolves, together again. And Warren, somehow, was now part of their story. Storm's recovery was slower than Frost's, but he was a fighter. Warren tended to him daily, changing bandages, rubbing warmth into his stiff limbs, feeding him with patience and care. The cabin now felt like a sanctuary, not just for the wolves, but for Warren himself. He would wake each day to the soft sound of paws shifting on wood, the occasional playful growl between siblings, or the heavy sighs of Shadow as he watched over the others. Warren had learned to understand them, not their language, but their feelings. He could tell when Shadow was uneasy, when Frost was excited, or when Storm was in pain. In the evenings, he would sit by the fire and talk aloud. "I never thought I'd have a family again," he'd say, his voice heavy with gratitude. "Not after Rachel. But here you are." Shadow would sit close during these talks, sometimes resting his massive head on Warren's knee. It was in those quiet moments that Warren felt the deepest healing, not from anything said or done, but from the simple presence of beings who trusted him completely. Still, the thought lingered like smoke in the rafters. They don't belong here forever. Warren wasn't sure who made the call, him or the wolves themselves, but the decision to contact a wildlife rehabilitation team was inevitable. He reached out to Kira, a wildlife researcher and tracker he had once met during a routine forest check. When he told her about the wolves, there was silence on the line, followed by disbelief. "You've had 3 wolves in your cabin for how long?" she asked. Warren chuckled. "Long enough to fall in love with them." Within a few days, Kira and her team arrived via snowmobile. She was gentle and respectful, moving slowly so as not to frighten the animals. She brought tracking collars, transportation crates, and tears in her eyes when she saw the bond between the wolves and Warren. "They're part of a tag pack I've been following for 2 years," she explained. "They went missing after the last blizzard. We thought they were lost." "They were," Warren said softly. "But maybe I was too." When it came time to load them into the crates, Warren could barely keep his composure. Shadow resisted at first, sensing something was changing, but when Warren knelt and whispered, "It's okay. You're going home," Shadow licked his face gently, then stepped into the crate on his own. Frost whined as the crate door closed, and Storm looked back with soulful eyes that said everything and nothing at once. 6 weeks later, Kira invited Warren to witness their release. They traveled to a ridge overlooking a vast expanse of snow-covered forest. The crates were opened one by one. Storm stepped out first, his gait now strong and sure. Frost bounded after him, his leg healed and spirit renewed. Shadow came last, turning back just once to meet Warren's eyes. A deep, echoing howl rose from his chest, a sound that filled the valley and Warren's heart all at once. And then they were gone, racing together into the wild. Warren stood there long after they disappeared from view, his face wet with tears and his heart strangely full. He had saved them, but in truth, they had saved him too. The cabin was quiet again. Too quiet. Warren sat alone by the fire, a cup of tea cooling in his hands, his eyes fixed on the spot where the wolves used to curl up. The silence pressed in like the snow outside, soft, constant, and suffocating. He tried going back to routines, chopping wood, boiling soup, journaling. But everything reminded him of them. The bowl Frost used. The scratch marks on the floor from Storm's restless pacing. The soot-blackened spot on the hearth where Shadow always sat watchfully. He would wake at night, hearing howls in his dreams. Sometimes he thought he heard them for real, but when he stepped outside, there was only wind, only memories. He hadn't realized how deeply they'd rooted themselves into his life, how they'd filled the emptiness Rachel had left behind. He tried to write a letter to her, something he hadn't done in years. Rachel, I never thought I could love again. Not anyone, not anything. But then these three came barreling into my world like a storm. You would have loved them. You would have called me a fool for letting wild animals into our cabin. And then you would have made them coats. I think I'm okay again. Not because I forgot you, but because something inside me started breathing again. He folded the letter and placed it by her photo. 2 weeks later, Warren was walking the ridgeline near the edge of the forest, gathering kindling when he felt it. He paused mid-step, turning slowly. The trees were still, the snow untouched. But something was watching. He scanned the tree line. And then, just for a second, he saw a flicker of movement. A flash of dark fur, a pair of golden eyes, then gone. Shadow. Warren stood perfectly still, heart pounding. He didn't call out, didn't move closer. He simply stood there, one hand resting on the axe handle at his side, eyes scanning the trees with quiet awe. He waited, but there was nothing more. And yet, somehow, he knew. They were out there, watching, remembering, still connected. That sighting sparked something in Warren, a renewed energy, a need to do something with the connection that still lived inside him. He began building again, not just repairing the cabin, but expanding it. He added a small outdoor shelter near the tree line with leftover wood, placing old bedding and meat there every few days, just in case. He wasn't trying to trap them or lure them back. It was simply a gesture, a welcome sign, a silent message. You're always safe here. Sometimes the meat would be gone by morning, sometimes not. Once, he found paw prints circling the shelter in a tight, protective spiral. He smiled. Hi, Shadow. Kira visited once more that month, delivering a satellite map of the wolves' new territory. They're thriving, she said. You're three. They're leading a small pack now. Frost was even seen chasing elk. It's wild. Warren chuckled. Of course he is. He's a scrappy little thing. They remember you, Warren. That's rare. Most wolves never look back. Then they're not just wolves, he replied. One evening in late spring, just as the last of the snow melted from the trees, Warren heard a sound he hadn't heard in months. Scratching. Low, insistent scratching on the cabin door. He froze. Couldn't breathe. Slowly, he walked over and opened it. And there he was. Storm. Alone, limping slightly, ribs a little more visible than they should be, but alive. His eyes were wild and tired, but the moment he saw Warren, his ears dropped back and he gave a soft, grateful whine. Warren didn't speak. He just knelt, arms open. Storm stepped forward and buried his face into Warren's chest, his body shivering, not from cold, but relief. That night, Storm lay beside the fire once more, just like old times. Warren placed a blanket over him and sat beside him, whispering, "You found your way back." But deep down, he knew Storm wasn't lost. He'd chosen to return. Storm stayed for nearly a week. Warren didn't question it. He simply embraced the unexpected reunion. He cooked fresh meat, restocked the fire, and let Storm come and go as he pleased. No leash, no fence, just freedom. On the third night, it snowed softly again, late for spring, but beautiful. Warren and Storm sat on the porch, watching the flakes dance. Storm rested his head against Warren's side. The man gently scratched behind his ears, smiling at the thought of how much this creature had changed him. "I don't know why you came back," he said, "but I needed it. Maybe you did too." As if in reply, Storm gave a soft chuff and closed his eyes. But Warren knew the wild couldn't be held. Storm had come not because he needed help. He had come to check in, to say goodbye, to remind Warren that their bond was never about ownership, it was about trust. And on the 8th day, Storm was gone. No sound, no sign, just paw prints in the fresh snow leading toward the trees. Summer came. The trees turned vibrant. The wildlife returned. Warren worked the garden, patched the roof, and lived with a new lightness in his chest. And then, one morning in late July, he heard a howl. Not far, not distant. It was Shadow. He rushed outside. There they were, all three of them, Shadow, Frost, and Storm, standing at the edge of the forest clearing. Full grown now, regal and strong. Their eyes shone with recognition, and in the quiet, Warren felt his chest ache with joy. He didn't move, didn't want to scare them off. But Frost broke the stillness first, trotting forward and nuzzling Warren's hand. Storm followed, licking his fingers. Shadow stayed back, tall and watchful, like always. For one precious hour, the four of them sat together in the clearing. No barriers, no fear, just the silence of trust. And then, as the wind shifted, Shadow gave a soft bark. The signal. The wolves turned and ran, together, into the trees. This time, Warren didn't cry. This time, he smiled. Autumn arrived quietly. Warren, now visibly more alive, had opened part of his land for wildlife tracking with Kara's help. He started writing a book titled The Wolves at My Door. It was part memoir, part love letter to nature. A story of grief, of healing, and of a bond that defied reason. On the final page, he wrote, "I thought I was saving them, but really, they were saving me." Shadow, Frost, Storm. They reminded me that family can be found in the most unexpected places. Even Claude, even Wild. The last image in his book? A photograph Kira had captured from a trail cam. 3 wolves, standing on a ridge, looking straight at the lens, as if watching over him still. Sometimes, the wild doesn't take something from you. It gives you back a piece of yourself you didn't know you'd lost. Some bonds go beyond words, beyond fear, beyond species. Warren didn't just rescue those wolves, they rescued him, too. If this story touched your heart, please take a moment to like the video, subscribe to Furry Frenzy TV, and share this with someone who believes in the power of kindness. And tell us in the comments, what would you do if 3 wild wolves showed up at your door? Pause. Until next time, stay wild, stay kind.